While lying in a hospital bed after a construction accident, I waited for my daughter to ask, "Dad, are you okay?" But her first words were, "I need money for a trip with my husband's family." I looked at my injured shoulder and quietly asked, "You called me for money, not to check on me." She sighed. "You can afford it." I said no. A few days later, I opened my company records and found something that made my heart stop. My daughter wasn't just hiding a vacation. She was part of a plan that could destroy everything I built. Before we go further, welcome to Dad Family Revenge, and thank you for being here. Drop a comment and tell me, where are you watching from? Your country, your city. I read every single one. This story contains fictional elements crafted for entertainment and educational purposes. Any resemblance to names or places is coincidental, but the lesson inside it is one worth carrying. My name is Arthur Bennett. I am 67 years old, and I have spent 35 years building things that were meant to last. Not just buildings, though I have put up enough of those to fill a skyline. I mean the kind of things a man builds when he has something to prove: a name, a reputation, a life that looks nothing like the one he started with. I grew up in Flatbush, Brooklyn, in a 2-bedroom apartment where the radiator knocked all winter and my father counted change at the kitchen table every Friday night. He was a good man who worked hard and still lost everything. The finance company came for his truck when I was 14, 2 men with a chain in front of the whole block on a Tuesday morning while I was walking to school. My father stood on the sidewalk and watched them take it. He didn't say a word, but I saw his jaw tighten and his hands curl at his sides, and I swore right then that I would never let anyone chain up something I had built. Bennett Construction started in 1988 with a used pickup truck I bought for $1,100, a set of tools I put on a credit card, and a handshake deal to renovate a dentist's office in Bay Ridge. 35 years later, we had 40 employees, a reputation across 4 boroughs, and the largest contract in the company's history, a 12-story residential building in Long Island City, Queens, worth $4.2 million. That was where I was standing on the afternoon everything changed. I was on the 8th floor walking the scaffolding with my foreman to check the steel framing on the east wall. It was a cold November afternoon, the kind that comes off the East River with teeth in it, and I had my hard hat pulled low and my collar up. I remember thinking the framing looked good, solid, the kind of work I was proud to put my name on. Then I heard a sound like a gunshot, sharp and metallic, followed immediately by a low groan of steel that I felt in my chest before I heard it with my ears. I turned toward the sound, and the scaffolding on the north side of the 8th floor came away from the building in one piece, like a page being torn from a book. I threw myself sideways. My right shoulder hit the concrete beam behind me, and the impact sent a white bolt of pain from my collarbone down to my fingertips. My ribs connected with the edge of the platform, and I heard something crack, not the steel this time, but something inside me. I grabbed the nearest upright with my left hand and held on while the scaffolding swung out and crashed against the side of the building with a sound that brought every worker on the site running. Frank DeLuca reached me first. He grabbed my arm with both hands, his face gone pale beneath his tan. Arthur, look at me. Can you move?" "I can move," I said, though my right arm was hanging at an angle that did not inspire confidence. "Don't move," Frank said immediately. "Just don't move. I've got you." The paramedics took me out on a stretcher 40 minutes later. I remember the cold air on my face and the scaffolding lying twisted on the ground below. And Frank standing at the edge of the platform watching the ambulance with his hard hat in his hands, turning it around and around like a wheel that had come loose. They took me to NYU Langone Medical Center on 34th Street. Broken right rib 2nd and 3rd. Damaged rotator cuff in my right shoulder. The ER doctor, a young woman who spoke with the focused efficiency of someone who had seen too much to waste words, told me I would need 4 to 6 weeks of rest, and that returning to a construction site before then was not a discussion she was willing to have. I lay in the hospital bed that first evening, and the pain settled into something constant and heavy across my whole right side. I thought about the building. I thought about my 40 workers. And I thought about Maggie, my wife of 38 years, who was 3 miles uptown at Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center in the middle of her 4th round of chemotherapy for stage 2 breast cancer. 2 hospitals. Same city. Same night. My chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the broken ribs. The night nurse checked my blood pressure and wrote my numbers on the whiteboard by the door. She pointed to the call button and told me to use it if the pain got worse. The man in the bed next to mine had his son sitting beside him, a young guy in a construction jacket, not much different from the ones my workers wore, leaning forward with his elbows on his knees, just being there. I looked at that for a while. My phone buzzed on the tray table. Clara's name on the screen. My daughter. 38 years old. My only child. I felt something warm move through me despite the pain, and I reached for the phone with my good hand and answered it. Clara. Dad. Her voice was smooth and even. I heard about the accident. Are you okay? Couple of broken ribs, I said. Shoulder. I'll be all right. Good. A half-beat pause, small and efficient. Listen, Dad, I need to ask you something. Is there any way you could transfer some money to my account? Ethan's family has this trip coming up, and it's really important for us to be there. You know how these things are. My right hand, the one I could not lift, tried to curl into a fist anyway. I felt the tendons pull against the damage, and I breathed through it slowly. You're asking me for money, I said. Right now. Dad, don't make it weird. The company is still making money. It's not a big deal. I looked up at the ceiling tiles of NYU Langone Medical Center, white and flat and indifferent, and I felt something cold move through me that had nothing to do with the hospital air. No, I said. One word. You're being completely unreasonable, Clara said, and her voice had shifted, the warmth gone out of it like a light switching off. I don't understand why you always make everything so difficult. The call ended. I set the phone back on the tray table and looked at the whiteboard where my blood pressure numbers were written in blue marker. The man in the next bed said something quiet to his son, and his son laughed softly and put a hand on the old man's shoulder. I turned my face toward the window and looked out at the lights of Manhattan, and something that had been whole inside me for 67 years developed its first crack, thin as a hairline fracture, invisible to the eye, but the kind that spreads if you don't catch it in time. I had 35 years of catching things in time. Frank DeLuca set my laptop on the hospital tray table the way a man sets down something he is not sure he should have brought. He had driven in from Queens that morning, still in his work clothes, concrete dust on his boots, and a coffee from the diner on Northern Boulevard. In his hand, the same diner we had eaten breakfast at together for 20 years before early job starts. He pulled the chair close to the bed and sat down without taking off his jacket, which told me he did not plan to stay long. Frank was not a man who lingered. "How's the shoulder?" he asked. "Hurts," I said. "Less than yesterday." "Good." He looked at the laptop on the tray table. Then he looked at me. His jaw worked like he was chewing on something he could not quite swallow. "You been checking the company accounts from in here?" "Not yet," I said. "Should I be?" Frank wrapped both hands around his coffee cup and squeezed until his knuckles went white. That was the answer. "Frank." My voice came out lower than I intended. "What did you find?" He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his phone. One of the younger guys on site had seen it that morning and brought it to Frank before the shift started. Frank had not said a word about it until now. He held the phone out to me, his thumb already on the screen, already on Clara's Instagram page, already on the post. My daughter was standing on the deck of a yacht. Not a sailboat, not a weekend rental, a yacht, the kind with a crew and a name painted on the hull in gold letters. She was wearing a white sundress and holding a champagne flute. Her head thrown back mid-laugh, her hair moving in a warm water breeze. Beside her stood Ethan, her husband, in a linen shirt, with his arm around her waist, squinting into the sun with the satisfied expression of a man who had gotten exactly what he wanted. The caption read, "Living the life we deserve," posted 3 days ago, the day after I was admitted. My throat tightened so sharply that I had to breathe through my nose twice before I trusted myself to speak. "She told me she needed money for an important trip," I said. "She said she couldn't afford it." Frank took his phone back. He turned it face down on his knee. "I know what she told you, Arthur." "Where is that charter out of Miami? 3-night cruise. The Harlow family books it every year, apparently." Frank's voice had gone flat and careful, the way it gets when he is delivering bad news on a job site and trying not to make it worse. "I heard one of the site guys mention it last month. I didn't think anything of it at the time." I opened the laptop. My hands were steady, steadier than I expected them to be, steadier than they had any right to be, and I pulled up the company's accounting system. QuickBooks, the same software we had used for 15 years, still under my login credentials, because this was my company, and I had never seen a reason to lock myself out of my own books. The first thing I checked was the operating account. The transactions loaded line by line, and I read them the way I had read job cost reports for 3 decades, systematically, without rushing, looking for the thing that did not belong. It took me 11 minutes to find it. Then another 9 to understand what I was looking at. Then I stopped breathing for a moment that felt much longer than it was. "Frank," I said. My voice came out strange, too, even too controlled, the voice I used when I found a structural problem on a job site and needed to stay calm so the crew around me stayed calm. "Come look at this." Frank leaned over the bedrail and looked at the screen. I watched his face. I had known Frank DeLuca for 22 years, and I had seen him react to cave-ins, contract disputes, a fire in the electrical room of a building in Astoria that took us 3 weeks to remediate. His face in a crisis was always the same, tight, focused, still. His face right now was not still. "Son of a..." he started, then stopped himself. 14 transfers, spread across 11 months, small enough that none of them would have triggered an automatic alert, large enough that together they added up to $183,000. Every single one was coded in the memo field as Vendor Advance Harlow Strategic LLC. I had never authorized a vendor relationship with any company called Harlow Strategic LLC. I typed the name into the New York State Business Entity Database, the same public registry I used whenever I vetted a new subcontractor. The search came back in under 30 seconds. Harlow Strategic LLC, registered in Delaware. Registered agent address, a law office in Wilmington that specialized in anonymous shell companies. Business address listed in New York, 1221 Avenue of the Americas, Manhattan, 31st floor. I knew that address. I had dropped Clara off there for lunch 2 years ago. It was Ethan Harlow's office building. The pain in my ribs had been a steady presence all morning, something I had learned to breathe around. Now I stopped feeling it entirely. My body had apparently decided there were more important things to attend to. $183,000, I said out loud, because sometimes you have to hear a number with your own ears to make it real. "Arthur," Frank started. "She had access to the vendor approval system," I said. My jaw was so tight the words came out clipped and hard. I gave her that access 3 years ago when she was helping with the quarterly reports. I never revoked it. You don't revoke access from family. That's what I told myself anyway. I know. I trusted her with it. I know. Frank reached out and put one large, rough hand on my forearm, the left one, the one that wasn't damaged. He gripped it once, firm and brief, the way you grip a man's arm when words are not going to be enough, and you know it. Arthur, what do you want to do? I looked at the screen. At 14 line items that represented 11 months of my company's money walking out the door into my son-in-law's pocket, authorized by my daughter while I was on job sites and in meeting rooms and in this hospital bed thinking I was building something that mattered. My eyes burned. I blinked hard once, twice, and pressed my left fist against my mouth for a moment until the burning passed. Then I took my fist away, and I straightened up against the pillows as much as my ribs would allow. Pull every invoice from the last 14 months, I said. Every single one. Paper copies. Bring them here tomorrow morning. I looked at Frank directly. And don't tell anyone. Not a word to anyone on that site. Can you do that? Frank held my eyes. His own were red at the corners in a way I had never seen before in 22 years. Yeah, he said quietly. I can do that. He left 20 minutes later. I listened to his boots on the hospital floor until I couldn't hear them anymore. Then I looked back at the laptop screen at $183,000 that had belonged to Bennett Construction and now belonged to a shell company registered to my daughter's husband. Outside the window, Manhattan went about its afternoon. Taxis, pedestrians, the ordinary machinery of a city that did not know or care what had just cracked open in room 414 of NYU Langone Medical Center. I closed the laptop, pressed my left hand flat against the mattress, and breathed. Frank arrived at 7:45 the next morning, carrying a banker's box that he set on the foot of my hospital bed, with both hands, the way you set down something heavy that you have been carrying for longer than you should have. Everything from the last 14 months, he said. Invoices, purchase orders, vendor contracts, delivery receipts. Every piece of paper that came through the office with a dollar amount on it. I looked at the box. Then I looked at Frank. He had dark circles under his eyes that told me he had not slept, and his shirt was the same one he had been wearing yesterday, which told me he had gone back to the office after leaving the hospital and stayed there most of the night. You went through it already, I said. Frank pulled the chair close and sat down heavily. He put his elbows on his knees and pressed his hands together in front of him. Fingers interlaced the way a man sits when he is about to say something he has been dreading. Arthur, I need you to look at something before we go through the rest of it. He reached into the box and pulled out a single invoice, held it out to me. Apex Building Supply, Queens. First order placed 8 months ago. I took the invoice with my left hand. Apex Building Supply, an address in Woodside, Queens. Structural steel rebar and scaffolding components. The price per unit was 23% lower than what we had been paying our regular supplier, a company out of Newark that we had worked with for 12 years without a problem. Who approved the switch to this vendor? I asked, though the cold spreading through my chest told me I already knew. Clara signed the vendor approval form, Frank said. I found it in the procurement file last night. Her signature dated 8 months ago. She told me at the time that Ethan had recommended them. Said they were trying to cut costs on the project. I set the invoice down on the blanket in front of me. My right hand was still in the sling, useless, and my left hand had started to tremble. Not from pain, but from the effort of keeping everything I was feeling from coming out all at once in a way that would not serve me. Frank, I said carefully. In 35 years of construction, have you ever seen structural steel get cheaper without getting thinner? Frank's jaw tightened. He shook his head slowly. No, I have not. Neither have I. We went through the rest of the box together. Frank pulling invoices and me reading them one by one, and with every page the picture got clearer and uglier. The steel delivered by Apex Building Supply to the Long Island City site did not meet the ASTM A36 standard, the American Society for Testing and Materials specification, that every structural steel component in a New York City building is legally required to satisfy. The documentation Apex had provided was there in the file, official-looking and neatly formatted, but when Frank had called the certification lab listed on the paperwork that morning, the lab had no record of ever testing a sample for Apex Building Supply. The certification documents were fabricated. My chest felt like someone had reached in and grabbed my heart with both hands and squeezed. 23 workers on that site. 23 men who showed up every morning trusting that the materials under their feet were what the paperwork said they were. A knock at the door. A man in a gray suit stepped in. The OSHA investigator assigned to my accident, a methodical, soft-spoken man named Patterson, who had interviewed me briefly on my second day in the hospital. He had called ahead that mornings to say he had preliminary findings to share. Mr. Bennett? He nodded, glanced at Frank and pulled a folded document from his jacket. I want to walk you through what our inspection team found on the 8th floor. He unfolded the document and laid it on the tray table in front of me. OSHA, the Occupational Safety and Health Administration, investigates every serious workplace injury on a construction site, and their preliminary reports are detailed, precise, and written in language that does not leave much room for interpretation. The language in this one was very clear. The safety bolts securing the scaffolding brackets on the 8th floor of the Long Island City site had not failed due to corrosion, metal fatigue, or improper installation. They had been removed manually. The thread patterns on the remaining bolt stubs showed clean extraction marks, consistent with a standard wrench, not stress fractures, consistent with mechanical failure. Someone had taken a wrench to the bolts holding up the 8th floor scaffolding, and then they had waited. The room tilted slightly. I gripped the bed rail with my left hand and held on. Mr. Bennett, Patterson said, watching my face carefully. I want to be clear that at this stage, this is a preliminary finding. We are continuing the investigation. I understand, I said. My voice came out steadier than I had any right to expect. Patterson left 10 minutes later. Frank stayed. He stood at the window with his back to me and his arms crossed over his chest, looking out at the gray November sky over 34th Street. And I could see from the set of his shoulders that he was fighting something, anger maybe, or grief, or the particular combination of the two that hits a man when something he helped build has been deliberately damaged. Frank, I said. He turned around. His eyes were red and his jaw was working hard. I've been on job sites my whole life, he said, and his voice cracked right down the middle of the sentence. I have never, Arthur, I have never seen anyone do something like that. To a working site. With men on it. I know. Those are our guys up there. His voice rose and broke again, and he pressed the back of his hand against his mouth for a moment. Danny Kowalski has 3 kids. Mike Torres just bought a house. These are our guys, Arthur. I know they are. My own throat was burning now, the kind of burning that starts behind your eyes and works its way down. That's why we're not going to let this go. Frank nodded. He turned back to the window, and I could see his reflection in the glass jaw, tight eyes, wet, a man who had given 22 years of his life to this company and was now standing in a hospital room, learning that someone had tried to bring it down from the inside. I reached into the banker's box and pulled out the last document on the stack. Something Frank had placed face down at the bottom, separated from the rest. A single printed email. The sender was Clara. The recipient was Ethan. The timestamp was 6 months before my accident. It read, "Dad's not slowing down. We need to move faster." I read it twice. Then I folded it in half along the original crease neatly and precisely and set it on the tray table next to my water cup. My daughter had written those words 6 months ago. 6 months ago, she had sat somewhere, her apartment, her office, some restaurant with her husband, and typed that sentence and hit send. While I was on job sites. While I was building the Long Island City project that was supposed to be the company's crowning achievement. While Maggie was starting her first round of chemotherapy. While I was building something my daughter had been deciding how to take it apart. I looked at the folded email for a long moment. Then I looked at Frank's reflection in the window. "Get me Patricia Walsh's number," I said, "and then go home and sleep. I need you sharp." They discharged me on the 9th day with a sling, a prescription for pain medication. I mostly did not take, and a printed sheet of restrictions that I folded into my jacket pocket without reading, because I already knew I was not going to follow most of them. The first place I went was not home. It was not the office. It was a building on York Avenue on the Upper East Side, 12 floors of pale brick and glass that housed Memorial Sloan Kettering Cancer Center, where my wife had been receiving chemotherapy for stage 2 breast cancer since the previous spring. I took a cab from the hospital because my shoulder made driving impossible. The driver did not say anything, and I was grateful for it. I watched Manhattan go by outside the window, the cross streets counting up as we moved north, the sidewalks full of people going about their ordinary days, and I pressed my left hand flat against my thigh to stop it from shaking. Maggie was in the infusion suite on the 4th floor. I knew the room by now, knew the particular quality of the light that came through the east-facing windows in the morning, knew the sound the IV pump made when a bag ran low, knew which nurses worked which shifts. I had spent enough hours in that room over the past several months to have memorized all of it. She was in the chair by the window, the one she always requested. A thin blanket over her lap, the IV line running from the bag on the pole to the port in her chest. Her hair was almost gone, fine white wisps at her temples was all that remained, and her face was thinner than it had been 6 months ago. But her eyes, when she looked up and saw me in the doorway, were exactly the same as they had been the day I married her. Sharp and warm and entirely present. "Arthur." Her face broke into a smile that made my chest hurt worse than the broken ribs. "You look terrible." "You look beautiful," I said, and I meant it completely. I crossed the room and bent down carefully, ribs protesting every inch of the movement, and kissed her forehead. She reached up with her free hand and pressed it against my cheek. And I stayed there for a moment longer than I needed to, my forehead touching hers. "Sit down before you fall down," she said softly. "You're white as a sheet." I sat in the chair beside her, and for a few minutes we just talked about small things, the nurses, the food, whether the tree in our backyard in Brooklyn had lost its leaves yet. Maggie had a way of doing that, of creating a few minutes of ordinary life inside whatever difficult thing was happening, and I had loved that about her for 38 years. Then she looked at me with those sharp, present eyes and said, "Tell me what's wrong, and I mean all of it." So I told her. I told her about the 14 transfers and the $183,000 and the shell company registered to Ethan's office address. I told her about Apex Building Supply and the fabricated steel certifications. I told her what Patterson from OSHA had said about the scaffold bolts. And I told her about the email 6 months old, 6 words long. "Dad's not slowing down. We need to move faster." Maggie listened without moving. Her free hand, the one without the IV, found mine on the armrest between our chairs and held on. I could feel her pulse in her fingertips, steady and quiet. When I finished, she did not say anything right away. She turned her face toward the window, and I watched her throat move as she swallowed. Her jaw tightened in a way I recognized, the same way it had tightened when Clara was 16 and wrecked the car and lied about it, and when Clara was 24 and borrowed money from us for a down payment and spent it on a vacation instead. Maggie had always seen Clara more clearly than I had. I had always found reasons not to look too hard. "There's something I need to tell you," Maggie said. Her voice was careful, the way it gets when she is choosing words that are going to land hard. 6 months ago, Clara came to see me here on a Tuesday afternoon when you were at the Long Island City site. My hand tightened around hers. "What did she say?" "She told me that Ethan's father, Richard Harlow, wanted to meet with her about the company, about Bennett Construction." Maggie turned back to look at me, and her eyes were bright with tears she was not going to let fall. "She asked me not to tell you. She said you had enough stress already. She said if you found out it might—" Her voice caught, and she pressed her lips together hard for a moment. "She said it might be too much for your heart." The chair underneath me felt very far from the floor suddenly. "She used your heart to keep you quiet," I said. The words came out flat because there was no other way to say them. "She used mine," Maggie said. "I wanted to protect you. I thought I was protecting you." A tear broke loose and ran down her cheek, and she pressed the back of her hand against it fiercely, as though she were angry at it for appearing. "Arthur, I am so sorry." "Maggie." I leaned forward and took both her hands in my left one, careful of the IV line. "Don't. This is not yours to carry." "I should have told you." "She knew you wouldn't. That's why she asked you instead of anyone else." My throat burned, and I swallowed against it hard. She knew exactly what she was doing. Maggie looked at me for a long moment. Then she straightened in the infusion chair, sat up with the particular dignity she had maintained through every round of chemo, through every morning she had been too sick to get out of bed, through every hard thing the past year had handed her, and she said, "Call Patricia Walsh tonight. Don't wait until tomorrow." "I won't." And Arthur. She squeezed my hand with a grip that was still, despite everything, stronger than I expected. "Whatever they took, it's just money. You're still here. I'm still here. That's the only number that matters." My eyes burned so sharply that I had to look at the ceiling for a moment. I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth and waited until I was sure I could speak without my voice breaking. "That's the only number that matters," I agreed. I stayed until the infusion bag ran dry and the nurse came to disconnect the line. Then I helped Maggie into her coat and walked her to the elevator and put her in a cab for the apartment where her sister was staying with her during treatment. I stood on York Avenue and watched the cab until it turned the corner. Then I took out my phone and called Patricia Walsh. Patricia Walsh picked up on the second ring. I had called her from the sidewalk on York Avenue with the noise of the city around me, a bus going past someone's car horn 2 blocks north, the ordinary sounds of Manhattan that I had stopped hearing years ago, the way you stop hearing your own heartbeat. Her voice on the phone was alert and unhurried, the voice of a woman who had been expecting difficult calls her entire career and had made peace with that fact. "Mr. Bennett," she said, "I heard about the accident. Are you all right?" "I've been better," I said. "I need to see you. Tomorrow morning, if possible." A brief pause, not hesitation, more like the sound of a calendar being consulted. 8 o'clock. My office on 47th. Bring whatever documentation you have and bring your foreman if he's available. I called Frank from the cab home. He said he would be there. Patricia Walsh's office was on the 43rd floor of a building on 47th Street in Midtown, the kind of building where the elevator moved so smoothly you barely felt it. The walls of her office were lined with bookshelves, real books, not decorative ones, their spines worn and marked with sticky tabs, and her desk was buried under organized stacks of documents that she clearly knew the location of down to the individual page. She was 52 years old, compact and precise in a charcoal suit, with reading glasses pushed up on her head, and the eyes of someone who had heard every version of every story and was still paying close attention. She shook my hand, nodded at Frank, and pointed us to the chairs across from her desk. "Talk," she said. We talked for 40 minutes. Frank and I went through it in order: the transfers, the shell company, the Apex Steel, the OSHA report, the email. Patricia wrote continuously on a yellow legal pad, and the only sounds in the room were our voices and her pen moving across paper. She did not say "I see" or "uh-huh," or any of the sounds people make to show they are listening. She just listened, which was more convincing. When we finished, she set down her pen and looked at me directly. "Before I respond to any of that," she said, "I need to ask you something. Have you received any legal correspondence in the last 48 hours? Anything from a law office or a court?" My stomach dropped 2 inches. "No." "Why?" Patricia opened the top drawer of her desk and slid a document across to me. "Because this was filed with New York Surrogate's Court yesterday afternoon. My office received a courtesy copy this morning because I'm listed in the county bar directory as a construction law specialist, and the petitioner's attorney apparently wanted to make sure I saw it quickly." I picked up the document. The header read, "In the matter of Arthur James Bennett petition for appointment of guardian pursuant to Article 81 of the New York Mental Hygiene Law." The petitioner was listed as Clara Bennett Harlow. My hands, both of them, the good one and the damaged one still in its sling, started to shake. I pressed my left hand flat against the document to steady it and read the rest. Article 81 of the New York Mental Hygiene Law governs guardianship of adults who are alleged to lack the capacity to manage their own affairs. Under Article 81, any person can petition the court to appoint a guardian for someone they claim is incapacitated, unable to make sound decisions about their finances, their medical care, or their daily life. If the court grants the petition, the appointed guardian assumes legal control over every significant decision the incapacitated person can make. Financial accounts, medical treatment, business operations, everything. The petition Clara had filed stated that I demonstrated signs of cognitive decline, that the workplace accident was evidence of my inability to safely manage a business, and that my recent financial decisions had put the company and its employees at risk. It requested that Clara Bennett Harlow be appointed as my legal guardian effective immediately upon the court's approval. If a court in the state of New York agreed with her, my daughter would have the legal authority to sign documents on my behalf, access my accounts, and make decisions about Bennett Construction and about me without my consent. Frank read it over my shoulder. I heard him pull in a sharp breath through his nose. "She can do this." His voice came out low and tight, the sound a man's voice makes when he is holding back something large. "She can just file a piece of paper and take over everything. She can file the petition," Patricia said, her voice steady and clinical. "Filing is not winning. But I want you both to understand what we are dealing with. Article 81 proceedings move on a court-mandated timeline. The respondent, Arthur, has 28 days from the date of filing to formally respond. The court will appoint an independent evaluator called a court evaluator to assess Arthur's capacity. That evaluator's report carries significant weight with the judge." She paused and looked at me over the top of her reading glasses. "The petition also includes a request for emergency temporary guardianship, which means Clara's attorney will argue that waiting for the full hearing puts the company and Arthur's assets at risk. If the judge grants that emergency request before the full hearing, Clara would have temporary legal control of Bennett Construction immediately. The words landed one at a time, each one heavier than the last. I sat in the chair across from Patricia Walsh's desk, with my broken ribs and my damaged shoulder, and a document in my hand that my daughter had filed to take away everything I had spent 35 years building, and I felt something move through me that was not quite anger and not quite grief, but some temperature between the two that I did not have a name for. "How do we fight it?" I asked. Patricia picked up her pen. "3 tracks in order," she wrote as she spoke. "Track 1, we defend the guardianship petition. I engage the court evaluator process immediately, and we demonstrate with documentation and witnesses that you are fully capable of managing your affairs. Your foreman is an important witness. Your physician is another." She drew a line under track 1 and moved to the next. Track 2, the financial fraud. What you've described to me this morning constitutes potential wire fraud under federal statute, specifically 18 United States Code, Section 1343. Because the transfers were conducted using electronic banking across state lines. I will prepare a formal referral to the New York Attorney General's office and the FBI's Financial Crimes Unit. Another line. Track 3, construction safety. The fabricated steel certifications and the tampered scaffolding fall under New York City's False Claims Act and potentially criminal reckless endangerment. I will coordinate with OSHA and the Department of Buildings. She set down the pen and folded her hands on the desk. "Arthur." Her voice shifted slightly, still precise, but with something underneath it. "I have handled elder law and construction fraud for 20 years. What your daughter and her husband have done is not impulsive. This was planned. The vendor approval, the transfers structured to avoid automatic alerts, the guardianship petition filed the moment you were hospitalized. This is a coordinated strategy." Frank's hand came down on the arm of his chair so hard it made a sound like a hammer on wood. His face had gone dark red, and his jaw was clenched so tight I could see the muscle working in his cheek. "How long to fight this?" I asked. 6 months minimum," Patricia said. "Possibly a year." I nodded once. "Then we start today." We were in the elevator going down when Frank turned to me. His eyes were still hot and his breathing was not entirely even. "Arthur," he said, "we're going to beat this. You know that, right?" My shoulder ached. My ribs ached. The document in my jacket pocket felt heavier than it had any right to. "I know," I said. The elevator doors opened on the lobby and we walked out into the midday noise of 47th Street. And somewhere above us, 43 floors up, Patricia Walsh was already writing. Frank called me 2 days after the meeting with Patricia. It was early morning, just past 7, and I was sitting at the kitchen table in Brooklyn with a cup of coffee I had not touched, watching the light come through the window the way it does in November, thin and pale and unconvinced of itself. "I heard from a guy in Jersey last night," Frank said. His voice had the particular flatness it gets when he is delivering information he wishes he did not have. "Guy named Sal Minetti. We worked together on a job in Hoboken about 12 years ago. Good man. He knows the New Jersey construction market the way I know Queens." "What did he tell you?" "He told me about Harlow Property Group." Frank paused. "Arthur, they've done this before." I set down my coffee cup. "Say that again." "2 companies. One in 2018, one in 2021. Both small construction and property management firms in northern Jersey. Both cases followed the same pattern Harlow connected through a family member, got access to company finances, drained the accounts over 12 to 14 months, through vendor payments to related LLCs, then had the family member file legal action against the owner when the owner started asking questions. The kitchen felt very still around me. Outside the window, a garbage truck was working its way down the block, the mechanical arm lifting and emptying with a sound like the world being turned upside down and shaken. Both cases were dismissed, Frank continued. Insufficient evidence both times. The money was structured carefully enough that tracing it was difficult, and in both cases the original owner didn't have the documentation to prove what had happened before the legal pressure got to them. But we have the documentation, I said. That's the difference. Frank's voice tightened. Arthur, this was not something Ethan Harlow invented when he married Clara. This is how his family operates. They found you because you were exactly what they were looking for. Established company, long track record owner getting older, one family member close enough to get access. I stood up from the kitchen table and walked to the window. Brooklyn was going about its morning outside, a woman walking a dog, a delivery truck double parked on the corner, two kids in school uniforms arguing about something at the bus stop. The ordinary machinery of a neighborhood that had no idea what was being discussed in the kitchen behind this window. Frank, I said. She still said yes. A long beat of silence. Then Frank said quietly, I know. She knew what they were doing, and she said yes. Yeah, Arthur. She did. I pressed my hand flat against the cold glass of the window. My chest was so tight it was difficult to draw a full breath, and the pain had nothing to do with the broken ribs. After I hung up with Frank, I walked down the hall to the small office at the front of the house, the room where I had run Bennett Construction for 20 years, before we outgrew it, and moved to the Brooklyn office, the room where I had signed the first city contract, where I had hired Frank, where I had spread blueprints across the floor on Saturday mornings, while Clara was small enough to crawl under the desk and fall asleep on the rug while I worked. I opened the bottom drawer of the old desk. Under a stack of folders I had not touched in years, I found what I was looking for. A photograph. 4 inches by 6, the color slightly faded with age. Clara, at 8 years old, sitting on my shoulders at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the first Bennett Construction project. A modest 4-unit residential building on Flatbush Avenue that I had poured every dollar I had into and nearly lost twice before it was done. In the photograph, Clara had both arms stretched out wide for balance, her hard hat, a child-sized yellow one I had bought her as a joke, tilted sideways on her head. Her mouth was open in a laugh so wide you could see she had recently lost a front tooth. I was laughing too. I remembered the exact moment. I remembered the weight of her on my shoulders and the way she had grabbed 2 fistfuls of my hair to steady herself, and how I had not minded at all. I sat down in the old desk chair and looked at the photograph for a long time. My eyes burned, and I let them burn. My throat closed down to almost nothing, and I breathed through it slowly, the way you breathe through pain when there is nothing else to do but wait for it to move. The little girl in that photograph had grown into a woman who had written an email that said, "We need to move faster." And I did not know at what point one became the other, or whether it had happened all at once or so gradually that there was no single moment I could point to and say that was when. I placed the photograph face down on the desk. Then I straightened up in the chair, pulled the desk lamp close, and opened my laptop. Patricia had sent me a document to review, the formal response to Clara's guardianship petition, drafted and ready for my signature. I read it from the first line to the last, and then I signed it with the careful, deliberate signature of a man who has been signing important documents for 35 years and knows exactly what his name on a piece of paper means. Clara arrived at 11 o'clock exactly. I had called her the evening before and asked her to come to the office and she had agreed without asking why, which told me she thought she already knew the reason. She thought I was going to give in. I watched her walk across the parking lot from the window of my office, the same window I had looked out of for 20 years, the one that faced the street, and the row of oak trees that had been saplings when I signed the lease, and were now thick enough that their roots were lifting the sidewalk. Clara walked the way she always walked, when she was confident, chin-up steps, deliberate, a slight forward lean, like a woman arriving somewhere she has already claimed. She was wearing a charcoal blazer and heels that were wrong for the cracked asphalt of a construction company parking lot. And I thought, not for the first time, that my daughter had spent her whole adult life dressing for a version of this company that existed only in her head. Frank was in the building, but I had asked him to stay in the back. Patricia had been clear, let Clara talk. Every word she says is information. Do not help her, and do not stop her. Clara came through the front door and crossed to my office and stepped inside with the particular ease of someone entering a room they have decided belongs to them. She looked around at the old desk, the filing cabinets, the framed photos of completed projects on the wall with an expression that was almost proprietary, like a buyer taking a second look at a property before closing. Dad. She sat down across from me without being invited and crossed her legs and folded her hands in her lap. You look better. Thank you for coming, I said. Of course. She tilted her head slightly. Dad, I think we both know this situation has gotten out of hand. I filed the petition because I was worried about you. Genuinely worried. The accident, Mom being sick, the stress of running the company at your age, I just want to make sure you're protected. Her voice was warm and measured and entirely rehearsed. And I recognized it the way you recognize a building material you have worked with for years. I knew exactly what it was made of and exactly how much weight it could bear. I appreciate that, I said. She leaned forward slightly. Dad, if you just let us help, if you step back a little, let Ethan and me take on some of the operational load, none of this has to be difficult. We can withdraw the petition. Everything goes back to normal. Everything goes back to normal, I repeated. Yes. She smiled, and for a fraction of a second, I saw the 8-year-old in the photograph. The wide grin, the missing tooth, and my chest seized so sharply that I had to press my left hand flat against the desk to keep my expression from showing it. Dad, you've worked so hard for so long. You deserve to rest. You deserve to let someone else carry this for a while. I looked at my daughter across the desk. Her hands were perfectly still in her lap. Her eyes were steady and clear. She had practiced this, I realized, had sat somewhere and rehearsed these words and these gestures, and this particular combination of concern and reassurance had tuned it like an instrument until it played exactly the note she wanted. Clara, I said. My voice came out even and quiet, the voice I use on job sites when something is wrong, and I need everyone around me to stay calm. Who approved the vendor change to Apex Building Supply on the Long Island City project. Something moved across her face fast, barely there gone before it fully arrived. Her chin lifted a fraction of an inch, and her jaw tightened, and I watched her make the decision in real time to hold her ground. That was a joint decision with project management, she said. Dad, what does that have to do with? Is that your signature on the vendor approval form dated October 14th? Her hands for the first time were not perfectly still. The right one pressed down against her knee with a force that whitened her knuckles. Dad, you're taking things out of context. Clara. I opened the folder on the desk in front of me and turned it so she could see the document inside. Her signature. Her date. Her authorization sending $183,000 of Bennett construction money toward a company registered to her husband's office address. I have the form. I have the transfers. I have the vendor certifications that were fabricated. I have the OSHA report on the scaffolding. My voice stayed level, but my left hand under the desk had curled into a fist so tight, the knuckles ached. I have all of it. Clara looked at the document. The color in her face shifted, a wave of something moving under her skin that she controlled within 2 seconds, shutting it down with a visible effort that made her jaw muscles work and her throat move as she swallowed. She stood up, smoothed her blazer with both hands, picked up her bag from the floor beside the chair. At the door, she stopped and turned back. Her eyes met mine across the width of the office, and in them I saw something I had not expected. Not fear, not anger, but a kind of cold and deliberate steadiness that was somehow worse than either. "You taught me something, Dad," she said. "You used to say it all the time when I was growing up. You said in business you protect what's yours." A pause, precise as a blade. "I learned that from you." The door closed behind her. I sat at the desk and listened to her heels on the concrete floor outside, growing fainter, and I pressed both hands flat on the desk surface, the good one and the damaged one, and I breathed in through my nose and out through my mouth until the burning behind my eyes receded enough that I could see the document in front of me clearly again. Frank appeared in the doorway 30 seconds later. "You okay?" he said. I looked up at him. My jaw ached from being held still for so long. "Pull the October 14th email," I said. "Send it to Patricia tonight. There are things you tell your wife that you would not tell your lawyer. Not because they are less important, because they are more." I drove to Memorial Sloan Kettering that evening without calling ahead, which I almost never do because Maggie likes warning before visitors. She likes to be sitting up. She likes to have her glasses on. She has a specific idea of how she wants to be seen, and I have always respected it. But that evening, I got in the car and drove north through Brooklyn and over the bridge and up the FDR without thinking about it, the way you drive a route you have taken so many times. It lives in your hands instead of your head. She was awake when I got there, sitting up in the recliner by the window with a book open in her lap and her reading glasses on, which meant she had not been expecting me but was not surprised either. 38 years of marriage will do that. You stop being surprised and start being ready. "You saw her today," Maggie said, not a question. "I saw her today," I said. I sat in the chair beside her, and I told her everything. The vendor approval form with Clara's signature. The way Clara had walked into my office like she was already measuring it for new furniture. The rehearsed warmth in her voice when she offered to withdraw the petition if I just stepped back and let them help. And then the moment the warmth went out of it, fast, like a light switching off when I laid the documents on the desk. Maggie listened the way she always listens, completely, without filling the space with reactions, her eyes on my face and her hands still in her lap. When I got to the part about what Clara said at the door, "You taught me that, in business, you protect what's yours." Maggie's jaw tightened, and a breath came out of her nose, sharp and hard, like something that had been under pressure, finally finding a small release. "She said that to you," Maggie said. Her voice was low and precise, the voice she uses when she is controlling something large. "She stood in your office in the building you built, and she said that to your face." "She did." Maggie took her glasses off and pressed the bridge of her nose between her thumb and forefinger. Her hand was trembling, a fine, barely visible tremor that I recognized from the bad weeks of chemo, the weeks when her body was fighting so hard on the inside that it showed in small ways on the outside. She pressed her lips together until they went white at the edges. "Maggie, don't." She put her glasses back on with both hands carefully, and when she looked at me again, her eyes were bright and fierce and wet at the corners. "Don't tell me to calm down, Arthur. Don't you dare tell me to calm down. I wasn't going to, I said. She reached out and took my left hand in both of hers. Her grip stronger than it looked. The grip of a woman who had been squeezing IV poles and chair arms for months and had built a kind of strength from it. She held on and looked at me, and I could see her fighting to get her breathing even. Arthur, do you remember what you told me the day you started the company? She asked. 1988. You were standing in the kitchen with your work boots still on, which I told you not to do, and you had the lease in your hand. I searched back through 35 years of mornings. Tell me, you said, Maggie, I am not building buildings. I am building something for Clara to stand on when I am gone. Her voice broke cleanly on the last word, and she stopped and pressed my hand harder and got herself back. That is what you said. Word for word. I remember because I cried, and you asked me why, and I told you it was because the coffee was too hot. My throat closed completely. I looked at the ceiling of the hospital room, the same pale institutional tile I had memorized over months of visits, and I breathed through my nose until the pressure behind my eyes receded enough to speak. She didn't stand on it, I said. No. Maggie's voice was steady now, the steadiness that comes after emotion, rather than before it. She tried to sell it, and Arthur, she squeezed my hands, both of them leaning forward in the recliner with the IV line pulling slightly at her arm. That is not your failure. That is hers. Do you hear me? That belongs to her, not to you. A tear broke loose from my left eye, and I reached up and pressed the back of my hand against it hard. Maggie watched me do it and did not say anything about it, which was the kindest thing she could have done. We sat together for a while after that, not talking about Clara or the company or the petition. Maggie told me the oak tree in the backyard needed trimming. Her sister had mentioned it, and it was dropping leaves on the neighbor's side of the fence again. I told her I would take care of it when this was over. She told me I said that every fall. I told her she was right. When the 8 o'clock nurse came in for the evening check, I stood up and helped Maggie back to the bed and straightened her blanket and kissed her forehead. She caught my hand as I pulled back. Don't let them make you small, she said. You built that company from nothing. You do not let them make it look like nothing. I held her hand for one more moment. Then I let go. If you have ever built something with your own hands, a business, a home, a life, and watched someone try to take it from you, drop the word builder in the comments right now and stay with me, because what happens in that courtroom is going to change everything. Before we go further, Arthur has just discovered that the people he trusted most have been quietly dismantling everything he built. And what comes next will change everything. If you are still with me right now, drop the number 35 in the comments for 35 years of honest work that someone tried to erase overnight. Let me know you are here. A note before we continue: portions of this story include fictional elements woven in for educational and storytelling purposes. If that is not something you want to hear, this is a good place to step away, and we completely respect that. In 35 years of business, I had sat across from bank officers, city inspectors, insurance adjusters, and union reps. I had been assessed, evaluated, audited, and reviewed more times than I could count. I knew what it felt like to have someone look at your work and decide whether it measured up. What I did not know, what nobody tells you until you are sitting in the chair, is what it feels like to have someone look at you and decide whether you still measure up yourself. Dr. Susan Palmer's office was on the 22nd floor of a building on Lexington Avenue, clean and neutral, in the way that professional spaces are when they are designed to put people at ease and mostly succeed. She was in her mid-50s with short gray hair and the kind of steady, unhurried attention that takes years to develop. She shook my hand when I came in, gestured to the chair across from her desk, and sat down without any of the small performative warmth that makes you distrust a person immediately. "Mr. Bennett," she said, opening a folder. "I want to explain what this process is before we begin. My role as court evaluator is independent. I don't represent your daughter, and I don't represent you. My report goes to Judge Vasquez, and my only obligation is to give her an accurate picture of your capacity to manage your affairs. Do you understand that?" "I understand it," I said. "Good. Then let's begin." She asked me about my daily routine, about how I managed the company's finances, about the accident and my recovery, about Maggie's illness and how I was handling it. The questions were methodical and unhurried, and I answered each one the way I have answered questions my whole working life, directly, without decoration, with the specific details that show you know what you are talking about. Then she leaned forward slightly and folded her hands on the desk. "Mr. Bennett, your daughter's petition states that you have been making unusual financial decisions that put the company at risk. Can you walk me through the company's recent vendor relationships?" I reached into the bag I had brought and set a folder on her desk. 40 pages. Bank statements, vendor approval forms, fabricated steel certifications, the OSHA preliminary report, and every transfer to Harlow Strategic LLC organized in chronological order, with a one-page summary at the front that Patricia had helped me write. "Dr. Palmer," I said. Unusual would be not noticing. She looked at the folder. Then she looked at me. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in her expression. Not surprise exactly, but a recalibration, the look of a person adjusting an estimate. She picked up the folder and began reading. I drove back to Brooklyn afterward, and I felt for the first time in weeks something close to steady. Not confident. I had been in business long enough to know that confidence before a decision is made is just another word for careless. But steady. The way a building feels steady when the foundation has been done right, and you know it because you poured it yourself. Patricia called at 7 that evening. I knew from the first half-second of her voice that something had changed. Patricia Walsh does not alarm easily. In the weeks since I had hired her, I had watched her receive bad news the way a good structure receives wind, flexing without breaking. But there was something in her voice that evening that was tight in a way I had not heard before. "Arthur," she said, "Clara's attorney filed a supplemental affidavit this afternoon." "What kind of affidavit?" "A witness statement. Someone who works for you or worked for you." A pause that felt longer than it was. "The name on the affidavit is Kevin Marsh." The name hit me somewhere below the sternum. Kevin Marsh, electrician, 8 years with Bennett Construction. A quiet man who did good work and never caused problems. 3 years ago, his son had been accepted to Fordham University, and Kevin had come to me in my office with his hat in his hands and told me the financial aid had fallen short by $30,000, and he did not know what to do. I had written a check that afternoon. I had not thought about it since. "What does it say?" My voice came out flat and careful. Patricia read it to me. Kevin had stated under oath that I frequently appeared confused on job sites, made erratic decisions under pressure, and had on multiple occasions been unable to recall details of ongoing projects. The language was precise and specific, and written with the kind of detail that does not come from imagination. Someone had coached him. Someone had sat with Kevin Marsh and gone through this carefully and told him exactly what to say. "Arthur." Patricia's voice came through the phone, steady and direct. "I need to ask you something, and I need you to answer me honestly. Is there any truth to what Kevin is saying?" I was standing in the kitchen of my house in Brooklyn, the same kitchen where I had drunk bad coffee and read contracts and planned projects for 30 years, My right hand, the one still healing from the fall, was pressing against the counter so hard I could feel my pulse in my fingertips. "No," I said. "There is not one word of truth in it." "Can you prove it?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The oak tree Maggie wanted trimmed stood dark against the evening sky, its branches bare now reaching upward. "I can do better than that," I said. "I can show you why Kevin said it. My father used to say that the men who hurt you worst are never the ones you expected. They are the ones you fed." I drove to Long Island City alone the next morning. No lawyer, no Frank, no folder of documents. Just me and the drive I had made 100 times over the Kosciuszko Bridge with the creek below still dark in the early light and the Manhattan skyline catching the first of the sun on the other side. I had not been back to the site since the ambulance took me out on a stretcher 6 weeks ago, and pulling into the parking area felt strange the way it feels to return to a place where something happened to you, when the place itself looks exactly the same, and you are the one who has changed. The site was active on the lower floors. The city had allowed work to continue on floors 1 through 7 while OSHA completed their investigation of the 8th. I could hear compressors running and the percussion of nail guns from somewhere inside the ordinary sounds of a building being built, which under any other circumstances would have been the best sound I knew. Kevin Marsh was on the 2nd floor running electrical conduit along the east wall. I knew his schedule because I had built the schedule the same way I knew every man's assignment on every floor. I took the stairs, my ribs protested every step, and I breathed through it and kept climbing and came out onto the 2nd floor and walked toward the sound of his work. He saw me when I was still 20 feet away. I watched it happen the moment his eyes found me, and his body registered what his mind had not yet processed. His hands stopped moving. The conduit bender he was holding dropped to his side. The color went out of his face the way color goes out of something when the light source is removed. I stopped in front of him. The 2nd floor was empty except for the two of us, the morning light coming in gray, and even through the unfinished window openings. "Kevin," I said. His throat moved. His jaw worked twice before any sound came out. "Mr. Bennett." His voice was wrecked, hoarse and thin, the voice of a man who had not been sleeping. I need you to know that I didn't want—" "Kevin." I kept my voice even and quiet. "Why?" He closed his eyes. His chin dropped toward his chest, and his shoulders came forward, and he stood there for a moment, like a man trying to make himself smaller. When he looked up, his eyes were red and wet at the edges, and his jaw was trembling with the effort of holding himself together. "They called me 4 weeks ago," he said. "Ethan Harlow. He said it was just going to be a formality. He said you were planning to retire anyway, and this was just the legal process to make the transition smooth. He said the company would keep running, everybody would keep their jobs, nothing would change." He pressed the back of his wrist against his mouth for a second. "My wife had her 2nd surgery in September, Mr. Bennett. The bills were so far behind on the bills. They offered $15,000, cash. I thought I told myself it wasn't going to hurt you. I told myself it was just paperwork. My chest ached with something that was not the broken ribs. I looked at this man, 8 years of showing up on time, 8 years of good work. The man who had come to my office with his hat in his hands and told me about his son and Fordham, and I felt the particular grief of watching someone make a choice that cannot be unmade. "Kevin," I said carefully, "I paid $30,000 for your son's tuition." The words landed. I watched them land. Kevin's face crumpled completely, not slowly, but all at once, like a wall that holds and then does not. And he turned away from me and pressed his forearm against the concrete column beside him, and his shoulders shook twice hard before he got himself back under control. When he turned around, his face was wet, and his eyes were raw. I know, he said. His voice had almost nothing left in it. I know what you did. I know. Then here is what you are going to do, I said. You are going to call Patricia Walsh. Her number is in the company directory. You are going to tell her every meeting you had with Ethan Harlow, every word he said, every location, every dollar. I held his gaze. And you are going to do it today. Kevin's chest rose and fell. What happens to me? I looked at him for a long moment. This frightened man with medical bills and a son at Fordham and $15,000 of bad judgment sitting somewhere in his bank account. That depends on what you do in the next 24 hours, I said. I left him there on the second floor and took the stairs back down. My ribs were burning by the time I reached the parking lot, and I stood beside the truck for a moment, with my hand on the door, breathing carefully, watching a pigeon work its way across the cracked asphalt with the focused determination of a creature that has no interest in anything except what is directly in front of it. Frank called at 6 that evening. His voice was the flattest I had ever heard it, flat in the way that very large things sometimes sound when they finally stop moving. Arthur, he said, OSHA issued their final report today. The scaffolding on the 8th floor was tampered with. Intentional removal of safety bolts. They're forwarding the complete file to the district attorney's office. I sat down at the kitchen table. The oak tree in the backyard was dark against the evening sky, branches reaching up bare and patient. All right, Frank, I said. You okay? I pressed my left hand flat on the table. The wood was solid and cool under my palm, the same table where I had eaten breakfast every morning for 20 years, where my father had sat the one time he visited, after I bought the house, and looked around at everything I had built, and did not say a word because he did not need to. I'll be better when this is over, I said. In construction, when you find rot in one beam, you do not patch it and move on. You find out how far it goes. Patricia and I took the subway downtown to the New York Attorney General's office on Broadway, in a building that looked the way government buildings look when they have been serious about something for a long time. Heavy stone, narrow windows, the kind of architecture that says decisions made here have weight. We went through security and rode the elevator to the Financial Crimes Unit on the 7th floor, and a receptionist walked us back through a corridor of offices where people sat at desks covered in paper and spoke on phones in low, unhurried voices. Investigator James Okafor was waiting for us in a conference room at the end of the hall. He was 40 years old, maybe 42, with close-cropped hair and the kind of face that gave nothing away. Not unfriendly, just professionally absent of expression. The face of a man who had learned that showing what he thought before he was ready to show it was a liability in his line of work. He shook my hand, shook Patricia's, and sat down across the table from us with a legal pad and a pen and nothing else. Mr. Bennett, he said, tell me everything. So I did. I talked for nearly 2 hours. I went through it in the order it had happened. The accident, the transfers, the Apex building supply certifications, the OSHA report, Clara's guardianship petition, Kevin Marsh and the $15,000 in the envelope, the pattern Frank had uncovered about Harlow Property Group in New Jersey. Okafor wrote continuously on his legal pad, and the only times he stopped me were to ask for specific dates, specific dollar amounts, specific names. He did not say good or I see, or that must have been difficult. He just listened and wrote, and I respected him for it. Patricia laid out the legal framework. When I finished, precise and unhurried the way she laid out everything. The transfers to Harlow Strategic LLC constitute wire fraud under 18 United States Code, Section 1343. She said, because they were executed through electronic banking that crossed state lines New York to the Delaware registration, and from there to accounts in New Jersey. Wire fraud under federal statute carries up to 20 years per count. 14 transfers means 14 potential counts. Okafor's pen did not stop moving. The fabricated steel certifications fall under New York Penal Law, Section 175.10, falsifying business records, in the first degree, a Class E felony. And because the victim is over 65 years of age, we can additionally apply New York Social Services Law, Section 473, elder financial abuse, which carries enhanced penalties and opens a parallel civil track. Okafor looked up from his pad for the first time. His eyes moved to me. "Mr. Bennett," he said, "I want to be straightforward with you. This investigation will take time. These things always do. But what you have brought us today—" He glanced at the folder Patricia had slid across the table, 40 pages organized and tabbed and cross-referenced. "This is a complete picture. Documentary evidence, a cooperating witness, a pattern across multiple jurisdictions." He paused. "That does not happen often." I nodded once. "Then use it." We took the subway back uptown in the early afternoon. Patricia got off at 42nd Street for her office. I rode on to Brooklyn and walked from the station to the house on the street I had lived on for 20 years, past the oak trees that had been saplings when I moved in, past the neighbor's fence that the tree roots were lifting, on one side past everything that looked exactly the same as it had always looked. The house was empty. Maggie had been staying at her sister Carol's apartment in Park Slope since starting her 5th round of chemo, because the treatment left her too depleted to be alone, and I had not been in any condition to take care of her the way she needed. The house without her was a different kind of place. Not lonely exactly, more like a room where the furniture is still there. But the light source has moved and everything looks slightly wrong. I sat at the kitchen table. The chair Maggie always used was across from mine, pulled slightly out from the table the way she always left it, as if she had just stepped away and would be back in a minute. My phone sat on the table in front of me. Clara's name was not on the screen. It had not appeared since the day she walked out of my office. I pressed my left hand flat on the table and looked at the chair across from me, and I let myself feel the full weight of what the last 3 weeks had been. The hospital bed, the transfers, the email, the petition, Kevin's face on the 2nd floor of the building, Maggie's hand gripping mine in the infusion chair. I let all of it sit there in the kitchen with me without trying to organize it or file it or make it into something that fit inside a folder. Then my phone rang. Clara's name was not on the screen. It was a number I did not recognize, a 908 area code, New Jersey. I let it ring 3 times. Then I picked up. "Mr. Bennett." A man's voice, careful and deliberate. "My name is Kevin Marsh. I just got off the phone with your attorney." A breath. I told her everything. I closed my eyes. My right hand, the one still healing, the one I had not been able to fully open for 6 weeks, pressed flat against the table beside the left one. Both hands down. Both of them steadier than they had been in a long time. "Thank you, Kevin," I said. "Patricia Walsh once told me that in a legal fight, the side that files the most paper is not winning. It is panicking." She called me 2 mornings after Kevin's phone call, and I knew from the first syllable that something had shifted, not in a way that meant we were losing, but in a way that meant the other side had seen something that frightened them and had decided to make noise about it. "Clara's attorney filed 3 emergency motions yesterday afternoon," Patricia said. "Jeffrey Aldridge. He's good, Arthur. He's expensive and he's good, and he files things like this when he's trying to bury the other side in paper before a hearing. I need you in my office tomorrow morning." Jeffrey Aldridge. I had heard the name in passing over the years, the kind of attorney whose name comes up at industry dinners, usually in a sentence that ends with, "and they lost everything." Clara had upgraded her legal representation, which told me Kevin's defection had landed exactly as hard as I had hoped it would. I was in Patricia's office at 8 the next morning. She had the 3 motions laid out on her desk, in order, each one tabbed and annotated in her precise handwriting. And she walked me through them the way a contractor walks a client through a problem, clearly without alarm, with the specific intention of making sure the person across the desk understood exactly what they were looking at. "Well, motion 1, she said, tapping the first document. Clara's attorney is asking the court to freeze Bennett Construction's operating accounts, pending the outcome of the guardianship hearing. The argument is that an allegedly incapacitated person should not have access to company funds during proceedings." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "This is the most dangerous of the 3. If the judge grants it, your payroll stops. Your suppliers stop getting paid. Your Long Island City project stops." My jaw tightened so hard I felt it in my back teeth. 23 workers, families, mortgages, Christmas coming in 6 weeks. "Can she get it?" I asked. "She can argue for it. But to freeze operating accounts, Aldridge needs to show imminent financial harm, that you are actively dissipating assets. The 40 pages you gave Dr. Palmer tell the opposite story. I'll file our opposition by end of day." She moved to the second document. Motion 2. Aldridge is subpoenaing your complete medical records, hospital records from NYU Langone, your primary care physician's files, anything that mentions your physical or cognitive state in the last 2 years. Patricia set the motion down. "This one I'm less worried about. Your records are clean. The only thing in them is a broken shoulder, 2 cracked ribs, and a blood pressure reading that your doctor will testify is entirely normal for a man under significant stress." And the third, Patricia picked up the last document and held it for a moment, before setting it in front of me. Her expression did not change, but something in the set of her mouth told me this was the one she wanted me to read carefully. I read it. Clara was petitioning the court to appoint her as temporary emergency guardian effective immediately before the full Article 81 hearing, on the grounds that I was currently engaged in complex and potentially harmful legal actions that put my assets and well-being at risk. In other words, she was arguing that my fighting back was itself evidence that I needed to be stopped. I set the document down on the desk. My left hand was pressing flat against my thigh under the table hard, and I made myself ease the pressure deliberately, the way you ease a clamp when you have tightened it past what the material can bear. "Arthur." Patricia leaned forward slightly. "I need you to hear something. Everything they are filing right now is reactive. Kevin Marsh called us. The Attorney General's office is active. Dr. Palmer's evaluation is complete, and her report is due any day. Aldridge is filing 3 emergency motions in one afternoon because someone on that side of the table looked at the board and realized they are not winning." "Scared people do dangerous things," I said. "Yes, and scared people also make mistakes." She picked up her pen. "Desperate filings leave paper trails, Arthur. Every motion they file becomes part of the record. Every argument Aldridge makes in writing is something we get to read, prepare for, and answer." She looked at me directly. "This is not a setback. This is them showing us their hand." I sat with that for a moment. Outside the window of Patricia's office, Midtown Manhattan was doing what it always did. Moving, building, arguing, making money, making mistakes, getting up the next morning, and doing it again. 35 years I had been part of that machinery. I was not finished with it yet. "How long until Dr. Palmer's report?" I asked. Patricia checked her email on the laptop beside her. Her eyes moved across the screen, and then she looked up, and for the first time since I had hired her, I saw something in her face that was not professional neutrality. It was the particular expression of a person who has just received information that changes the shape of a room. "Arthur," she said. "It came in this morning. Dr. Palmer filed early. A pause. I need you to come back tomorrow. You are going to want to hear this in person. My heart knocked hard against my broken ribs. Is it good? I asked. Patricia closed the laptop. She picked up her pen. She looked at me across the desk with 20 years of elder law and construction fraud between us, and she did something I had not seen her do once in all the weeks we had been working together. She smiled. 18 pages. That is how long it took Dr. Susan Palmer to say what I already knew, but needed someone with a medical license and a court appointment to put on the record. Patricia read the key findings out loud, her voice even and unhurried the way she read everything that mattered. Mr. Arthur James Bennett demonstrates no signs of cognitive impairment, diminished capacity, or inability to manage his personal or financial affairs. He is fully oriented, demonstrates detailed comprehension of complex financial and legal matters, and shows sound judgment under significant stress. The petition for guardianship is not supported by clinical evidence, and it is this evaluator's recommendation that it be dismissed. She set the report down on the desk and looked at me. Frank, sitting beside me, exhaled so hard his whole chest deflated. He pressed both hands against his knees and leaned forward and looked at the floor for a moment, and when he looked back up, his eyes were red at the corners. "I told you," he said, his voice rough around the edges. "Didn't I tell you?" "You told me," I said. My own chest felt strange. Not relief exactly, more like the feeling when a load-bearing wall turns out to be exactly as solid as you built it. You knew it would hold. But there is still something that unknots in you when it does. Patricia gave us 20 minutes with the report. Then she put it away and looked at me across the desk with the expression she uses when the conversation is shifting from information to preparation. "The hearing is the day after tomorrow," she said. "Aldridge is good in a courtroom. He will try to make you look like a man who cannot control his emotions and cannot keep his facts straight. So here is what you are going to do. You are going to answer every question I ask you right now, and you are going to answer it the way you answer everything, directly, specifically, and without decoration. And when Aldridge asks you something tomorrow, you are going to do the same thing." We went through it for 2 hours. Every question Patricia could imagine Aldridge asking, every document he might put in front of me, every version of the argument that I was too old and too stressed and too close to the situation to be trusted with my own company. Patricia did not let me get away with anything loose or approximate. When I said around that time, she stopped me and made me say the exact date. When I said something like that, she made me say the exact amount. At one point, I gave an answer that ran long, and she held up one hand. "Arthur, stop. When Aldridge asks you a yes or no question, you give him yes or no. You are not there to explain yourself to him. You are there to answer the judge." "Understood," I said. "Good," she made a note. "In that courtroom, you are not a victim. You are a founder. You are a builder. The way you walk and the way you sit, the way you hold yourself before you say a single word, that is testimony. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood exactly what she was telling me. Frank drove me to Sloan Kettering that evening. Maggie had finished her 6th round of chemo that afternoon, and I had not wanted her to be alone, but I also had not wanted to drive, because the shoulder was still unreliable when I was tired. Frank pulled up to the entrance and put the car in park. "You want me to wait?" he said. "Go home, Frank. Sleep." He looked at me for a moment. "You nervous about tomorrow?" I thought about it honestly. "No," I said. "I'm ready." He nodded once slowly, the way Frank nods when he has checked something and found it sound. I got out of the car and went inside. Maggie was in the bed, not the recliner. The 6th round hit harder than the others, and she had not had the energy to move to the chair. Her face was pale and drawn, and her eyes were half closed when I came in, but when she heard my footsteps, they opened fully, and she reached for my hand before I even sat down. "Tell me," she said. I told her about the report, about the hearing tomorrow, about the 2 hours with Patricia, and the questions and the answers, and the part about walking in like a founder, not a victim. Maggie listened with her hand wrapped around mine, her grip weaker than usual, but still there, still present, still Maggie. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she turned her head on the pillow and looked at me directly with eyes that were tired and clear and certain all at once. "Arthur Bennett," she said. "Go be Arthur Bennett tomorrow." I stayed until she fell asleep. Then I drove home to Brooklyn through the November dark, and in the morning I took the suit from the back of the closet, the one I wore the day I signed the first city contract in 1994, slightly tight across the shoulders. Now 30 years of breakfasts and job sites having their say, and I put it on. Before I tell you what happened inside that courtroom, before I tell you what Patricia Walsh said that made the entire room go silent, I need to know you are still with me. Drop the word builder in the comments right now. Because what happens in the next few minutes is the moment this whole story has been building toward. This story contains fictional elements created for entertainment and educational value. If you would prefer not to continue, we understand, and you are welcome to step away at any time. Frank was waiting on the sidewalk at 6:45. He was wearing a tie. Dark blue, slightly crooked, the kind of tie a man puts on when he owns exactly one and has not worn it in long enough that he has forgotten how to get the length right. In 22 years, I had never once seen Frank DeLuca wear a tie. I did not say a word about it. Neither did he. Some things do not need to be said. We took the BQE into Manhattan and parked in a garage on Chambers Street and walked the half block to New York Surrogate's Court, a building I had driven past 100 times over 35 years without ever thinking I would walk through its doors as the man whose name was on the petition inside. The stone facade was dark with age, and the brass handles on the main doors had been polished by decades of hands. I pushed through, and the weight of the door was the weight of something serious. Courtroom 7 was on the second floor. We found it at 8:55, and I stood outside it for a moment, with Frank beside me looking at the door the way you look at a job site before you go in, taking the measure of it, deciding how you are going to move through it. "Ready?" Frank said. "Let's go," I said. Clara and Ethan were already inside, seated at the left table with Jeffrey Aldridge between them. Aldridge was exactly what I had expected, 60s, silver-haired, a suit that cost more than most people's monthly rent, a calmness in his posture that came from spending his career in rooms like this one, and winning in most of them. Ethan sat straight and still. Clara did not look at me when I came in. I sat at the right table with Patricia. Frank took a seat in the gallery behind us. I set my hands flat on the table and looked at the front of the room and waited. Judge Eleanor Vasquez entered at 9 o'clock precisely. She was in her early 60s, slight, with reading glasses on a chain around her neck, and the deliberate economy of movement that belongs to people who have presided over difficult things for a long time and stopped wasting energy on anything that is not the work. She sat, opened the file in front of her, and read for 90 seconds without acknowledging anyone in the room. Then she looked up. "We're here on the petition of Clara Bennett Harlow for appointment as guardian of Arthur James Bennett, pursuant to Article 81 of the Mental Hygiene Law. Counsel, are both parties ready to proceed?" "Ready, Your Honor," Aldridge said. "Ready?" Patricia said. Aldridge opened. He was smooth and he was good, and he built his case the way a skilled contractor builds something designed to look better than it is, quickly, confidently, with just enough detail to discourage close inspection. He described me as a man diminished by age and stress and physical injury, a man whose judgment had become erratic and whose grip on the company he had built was slipping in ways that endangered workers, contracts, and assets. He used the words safety and protection and family concern so many times, they started to sound like the walls of a room. Patricia stood when it was her turn, and she did not raise her voice once. She presented the 40-page document package. She presented Dr. Palmer's report. She presented Kevin Marsh's revised statement and the 3 meetings with Ethan Harlow at the coffee shop in Astoria, Queens, documented by date and amount. She presented the OSHA final report. She laid each item down in front of Judge Vasquez the way you lay down tools you have used before and know how to use without ceremony, without drama, with the confidence of someone who does not need the room to be impressed. Judge Vasquez asked 3 questions. Patricia answered 2. I answered 1 directly, specifically, without duration, exactly the way we had practiced. Then Aldridge called his first witness, a man from the Contractors Association who testified that I had seemed distracted in a meeting 14 months ago. Patricia cross-examined him in 4 questions. How many meetings do you attend per month? Approximately 20. Do you retain complete recall of every detail of every one of those meetings? He opened his mouth, closed it. No further questions, Patricia said. Aldridge shuffled his papers. He looked at Clara, something passing between them that I could not read from across the room. Then he stood. Your Honor, petitioner calls Clara Bennett Harlow to the stand. Clara stood. She smoothed her jacket with both hands, a gesture so practiced it had become invisible to her. She walked to the witness stand and sat down and folded her hands in her lap and looked at Aldridge with the composed, prepared expression of a woman who had been ready for this moment for a long time. I looked at my daughter sitting in that chair, and my heart contracted so sharply it took my breath away for 1 second. Not from anger, not from grief, but from the sheer accumulated weight of everything that had brought us both to this room. Then Patricia Walsh stood up, and the temperature in courtroom 7 changed. Patricia once told me she never asks a question in a courtroom that she does not already know the answer to. What she did not tell me was how much it would hurt to watch someone else learn that answer out loud. She walked toward the witness stand, slowly, without theater, carrying nothing but a single manila folder and the particular stillness of a person who has already won the argument in her head and is now simply allowing the room to catch up. Aldridge shifted in his chair. Clara watched Patricia approach with her hands folded in her lap and her chin level still composed, still prepared. Patricia stopped a few feet from the stand. She opened the folder. She looked at Clara the way you look at a document you have read many times and know by heart. Ms. Bennett Harlow, she said, your petition states that your father has been making unusual financial decisions that endangered the company. I'd like to start there. She lifted a single page from the folder and held it up. This is the vendor approval form for Apex Building Supply dated October 14th of last year. Can you tell the court whose signature appears on the approval line? Clara's composure held, but something moved underneath it. Something small and fast, like a hairline pack, appearing in a surface that looks solid. That was a collaborative decision with project management. Ms. Bennett Harlow. Patricia's voice did not rise. Whose signature is on the line? A beat. Clara's jaw tightened. Mine. Thank you. Patricia set the page down on the edge of the judge's bench so Judge Vasquez could see it clearly. And this vendor whose materials have been cited by OSHA as failing structural safety standards and whose scaffolding components were found to have been intentionally compromised was introduced to Bennett Construction by your husband. Is that correct? Aldridge rose. Objection, Your Honor. Compound. Sustained as to form. Judge Vasquez said. Rephrase counselor. Who introduced Apex Building Supply to Bennett Construction. Clara's throat moved as she swallowed. Ethan mentioned them as a cost-saving option. And you approved them? Yes. Without additional vetting. Clara's hands still folded in her lap, pressed together harder. We reviewed their documentation that has since been found to be fabricated. Patricia did not wait for an objection. She moved immediately to the folder, pulled a second page, and held it toward the bench. Exhibit 22. The transfer records showing $183,000 moved from Bennett Construction operating accounts to Harlow Strategic LLC over 11 months. Ms. Bennett Harlow, can you show the court one invoice, one deliverable, one completed work product from Harlow Strategic LLC to Bennett Construction in exchange for those funds? The courtroom went quiet in the particular way that rooms go quiet when everyone in them has just understood something at the same time. Aldridge was on his feet. Objection, Your Honor. Relevance to the guardianship proceeding. This goes directly to the question of who has been making dangerous financial decisions in this company, Your Honor. Patricia said, her voice absolutely level. I would argue it is highly relevant. Judge Vasquez looked at Aldridge, then at Patricia, then at Clara on the stand, whose composure was still there, but visibly costing her something now. Her jaw working, her shoulders slightly forward, the careful architecture of her preparation showing its seams. Overruled, the judge said. The witness will answer. Clara looked at Aldridge. Aldridge looked at his papers. There was nothing in his papers that could help her. 8 seconds of silence. I counted them. I'll move on, Patricia said. She took one step closer to the stand, and her voice when she spoke again was quieter than it had been. Not softer, but lower, more deliberate, the voice of someone delivering the last and most important item on a list. Ms. Bennett Harlow, your petition characterizes your father as a man incapable of managing his own affairs. I want to make sure I have the facts correct. She paused. Your father, in 9 days in a hospital bed with 2 broken ribs and a damaged shoulder, identified $183,000 in unauthorized transfers, traced them to a company registered at your husband's office address, uncovered fabricated safety certifications on an active job site with 23 workers, retained legal counsel, and assembled a 40-page evidence package with bank records, emails, and vendor documentation. She closed the folder. Ms. Bennett Harlow, if that is what cognitive decline looks like in your family, I genuinely need to know what competence looks like. The courtroom did not make a sound. Judge Vasquez removed her reading glasses and set them on the bench in front of her. She looked at the documents Patricia had presented. She looked at Clara. She looked at me. Then she said, "We'll take a 30-minute recess," and stood, and everyone in the room stood with her. In the hallway, Patricia said nothing. She stood with her folder under her arm and checked her phone, and I stood beside her, and Frank stood beside me. And we did not need to fill the space with words, because the space did not need filling. 15 minutes into the recess, I looked back through the small window in the courtroom door. Clara was leaning toward Aldridge, her voice low and urgent, one hand gripping the edge of the table. Ethan was in the chair beside her. Then he was not. I watched him stand, button his jacket with hands that were not entirely steady, and walk toward the side exit of the courtroom. He did not look at Clara. He did not look at Aldridge. He pushed through the door and he was gone. He did not come back. Judge Eleanor Vasquez had been on the bench for 22 years. She did not rush. She did not perform. She walked back into courtroom 7 at exactly the 30-minute mark, sat down, opened the file in front of her, and read. The room was so quiet, I could hear the heat coming through the vents in the ceiling. Then she looked up. The petition for guardianship of Arthur James Bennett is hereby dismissed with prejudice. Her voice was even and final, the voice of a door closing on something that will not be reopened. The court finds no credible clinical or factual evidence of incapacity. Dr. Palmer's evaluation is thorough and unambiguous. The petitioner has not met the burden of proof required under Article 81. She looked down at the file again. Furthermore, the financial transactions detailed in respondents' exhibits are hereby referred to the New York Attorney General's office for review. The court will retain jurisdiction pending that referral. Dismissed with prejudice. Those 3 words meant Clara could not refile the same petition with the same arguments. It was over in the only way that mattered on the record, permanently in language that did not leave room for interpretation. Patricia put her pen down on the table. That was all. No smile, no exhale, no turning to look at me. Just the pen going down quietly, the way you set down a tool when the work is finished. Frank made a sound behind me, low and involuntary, the sound a man makes when something he has been bracing against for a long time suddenly stops pushing. I heard him press his hand flat on the gallery railing to steady himself. I sat with my hands on the table and I looked at the front of the room and I breathed. Clara left without looking at me. Aldridge gathered his papers with the efficient composure of a man who loses occasionally and has learned to absorb it without theater. The room emptied around us, and Patricia and Frank and I were the last ones in it. In the hallway, Frank put both arms around me, something he had never done in 22 years, and held on for 3 seconds. His big hands gripping my shoulders, careful of the right one, and then he let go and stepped back and looked at the floor and cleared his throat twice. "Okay," he said. His voice was wrecked, and he did not care. "Okay. Okay," I said. 3 weeks later, I was sitting in my office in Brooklyn on a Tuesday afternoon when my phone rang. Clara's name on the screen. I looked at it for a long moment. Outside the window, the oak trees were bare, their branches dark against a pale winter sky. I picked up. "Dad?" Her voice was different, stripped of the smoothness, stripped of the preparation, just a voice I had known for 38 years, with nothing left to protect it. "I'm sorry." My throat tightened. I looked out the window at the bare branches. "I know," I said. "Dad, Clara." My voice came out almost gentle because it was almost gentle. "I know." I hung up. I set the phone down on the desk. I sat in the chair where I had signed 35 years of contracts, and I let the quiet of the office settle around me, the hum of the building, the sound of Brooklyn outside the ordinary sounds of a life that was still mine. Then Frank knocked on the open door. "Arthur." Something different in his voice, something lighter. "Long Island City. Department of Buildings finished their review today. Took them 3 weeks after the OSHA referral cleared. City inspector signed off this afternoon. We're cleared to resume Monday." I looked up at him. "All floors," I said. He grinned, the full grin, the one I had not seen since before any of this started. "All 12. Monday morning came cold and clear. The kind of November day that arrives in New York, like a statement, sky the color of new steel air, sharp enough to remind you it means business." I drove to Long Island City alone. I did not call ahead. I did not tell Frank what time I would arrive. I just got in the truck at 6:30 and drove the route I had driven 100 times over the Kosciuszko Bridge, with the creek dark below and the skyline ahead, and I pulled into the site parking area and sat in the truck for a moment, looking at the building. 12 floors. Still standing. Still mine. I got out and walked in. The crew was already there. Frank had made sure of that, had called every man the night before and told them 7 o'clock, full crew, no exceptions. When I came through the site entrance, 23 men stopped what they were doing. Not all at once, but one by one, the way awareness moves through a group of people who work together and know how to read a room. Nobody said anything. Nobody started clapping or made a speech. Danny Kowalski, who had been with me 11 years, looked up from the conduit he was running and gave me one slow nod. The man beside him did the same. Then the man beside him. Then they all went back to work. That was enough. That was exactly enough. Frank materialized at my shoulder. 8 weeks, he said. We'll finish on schedule. Under budget, I said. He gave me the look he reserves for questions he considers beneath both of us. Don't push it. I laughed. The sound surprised me, full and unguarded, the kind of laugh that happens when something locked inside you finally comes loose. Frank looked at me sideways, and then he laughed too. And for a moment, we were just two men standing in a building that was almost finished, laughing at nothing and everything. A month later, I drove Maggie to her appointment at Sloan Kettering for the final scan results. We sat in the doctor's office, the same office where 8 months ago we had heard the words Stage 2 and treatment plan, and the particular careful language doctors use when they are preparing you for something hard. The same pale walls, the same window with the east-facing light. The doctor opened the file. She looked at it for a moment that felt much longer than it was. Mrs. Bennett, she said. No evidence of disease. 4 words. Maggie's hand found mine on the armrest between our chairs and gripped it so hard I felt my knuckles compress. A sound came out of her, small and broken and completely unguarded, a sound I had never heard from her in 38 years, the sound of something that has been held under enormous pressure for a very long time, finally being released. She pressed her free hand over her mouth, and her shoulders shook, and her eyes filled and overflowed, and she did not try to stop any of it. I pressed my forehead against her temple and closed my eyes. We sat like that for a while. The doctor quietly left the room. I drove Maggie home to Brooklyn that afternoon. October light on the bridge, the water below catching it in pieces. Maggie looked out the window the whole way, her hand still in mine across the center console. She did not say anything. Neither did I. We did not need to. Back in the kitchen, she stood at the counter and filled the coffee maker the way she had filled it every morning for 30 years, measuring the grounds, running the water, setting the carafe in place with a small, definitive click. I stood in the doorway and watched her, and felt something move through me that I did not have a name for, and did not need one. She was just a woman making coffee in her own kitchen. It was the best thing I had ever seen. The Long Island City building was finished on a Tuesday in late January, 3 days ahead of schedule. Frank called me when the final inspection cleared. "Arthur," he said, and I could hear the building behind him, the quiet of a finished thing. No more compressors, no more nail guns, just the sound of a structure that had become what it was supposed to be. "Come see what we built." I drove out from Brooklyn in the early afternoon. The sky was the pale gray of winter, the kind that makes the city look like a photograph of itself. I took the elevator to the 12th floor and stepped out and walked to the window. Manhattan spread west across the river, the skyline I had worked beside for 35 years. Brooklyn Bridge south, Queens below. The whole geography of the life I had built, visible from one window on a floor I had almost not lived to finish. Frank came and stood beside me. We looked out for a while without speaking, which was different from silence. It was the particular quiet of two men who have been through something together and do not need to explain it to each other. You know what my father told me? I said, the day the finance company came for his truck. Frank waited. He said, Arthur, they can take the truck. They can't take what you know how to do. Frank nodded slowly. Once. Turns out he was right. Here's what happened to the rest of it. Because you have stayed with me this long, and you deserve the full account. Ethan Harlow accepted a plea agreement on federal wire fraud charges, 18 months restitution of the full $183,000 and 3 years of supervised release. He did not look like a man who closes deals when he walked into the federal courthouse. He looked like what he was. Harlow Strategic LLC was dissolved. Apex Building Supply lost its operating license and is currently under separate criminal investigation in New Jersey for the same fabricated certification scheme used on my project. Frank DeLuca was appointed Vice President of Operations of Bennett Construction, effective the first of the year. I had his new business cards made before I told him, which meant I got to watch his face when he read them. It was a good moment. One of the best. Clara did not go to prison. The prosecutors determined her cooperation, limited as it was, and her lack of direct involvement in the wire transfers themselves, placed her below the threshold for criminal charges. She lost her reputation in the New York real estate world, which in some ways is a longer sentence. I left one door open for her, small and conditional. She has not walked through it yet. I am not waiting. Maggie planted new flowers in the backyard in March. She said the oak tree looked better since I finally trimmed it. I stood on the 12th floor of the building that almost killed me and looked out at the city, and I thought about what my father knew that took me 35 years to fully understand. They can take the truck. They can take the money. They can take the name off the door and the chair at the table and the title you were promised. What they cannot take is the thing you actually are. I built Bennett Construction from a used pickup truck and a handshake and 35 years of showing up. My daughter tried to sell it. My son-in-law tried to drain it. A judge in Manhattan put a stamp on a document that said it was still mine. But it was always mine. Not because of the document, because I built it. That is the only thing that was ever true. And it is the only thing that nobody, not a petition, not a shell company, not a fabricated certificate or a coached affidavit or a leather folder full of false promises, can transfer out of your hands without your signature. I looked at Brooklyn one more time. The bridge, the water, the streets where I started. Then I turned around and got back to work. I spent 35 years building something honest. And I learned the hardest way a man can learn that love without accountability is just a door left open for the wrong people. Do not make my mistake. Do not hand trust to someone simply because they share your blood. Watch what people do with small things before you give them the large ones. Standing on that 12th floor, I understood something I could not have learned any other way. God does not always stop the fall. But sometimes He makes sure you land somewhere you can still get up from. These family stories, revenge, are not about hatred. They are about what happens when quiet people finally stop being quiet. Every family drama revenge I have witnessed ends the same way. Not with a shout, but with a document, a timestamp, and the truth that was always there waiting to be read. If this family story's revenge reached you today, drop a comment below. Tell me what you would have done. Share this with someone building something worth protecting. And if you believe honest work deserves to stand, subscribe, and stay with us. Thank you for being here until the very last word. Some stories on this channel include fictional elements created purely for educational and narrative purposes. If this content is not right for you, we understand completely. Please find what serves you best